Bureaucracy. Let's talk about it. After going through your FRQs for the last few weeks, I think this is something we need to review on. And I figured what better musical intro to this week's video than the song Mr. Bureaucracy by the band Paradox. Cue the intro. Apparently I can't. It's copyrighted. So like most bands, I guess Paradox copyrighted their song. Who can blame them? They want to make money for what they created, but they issued that copyright with the U.S. Copyright Office, which is under the Library of Congress, which is a bureaucracy, which means I was stopped from playing the song Mr. Bureaucrat by bureaucrats. Huh. Listen, I don't blame you all for struggling with bureaucracy. It's not something that's often talked about and has connotations of being boring and mundane, despite the fact that it's everywhere. It doesn't quite have the excitement that Congress or the president have. So when we use the term bureaucracy, we're talking about the 15 cabinet departments in the executive branch. Each cabinet department is in charge of enforcing policies and regulations within their specific policy realm. Now, what do I mean by enforce? Well, enforcing policies means that departments and the agencies within it can conduct investigations into wrongdoing, they can prosecute people for breaking federal law, issue fines, and in some cases, straight up arrest people. Now, within those main departments, there are sub-departments. For example, the FBI is under the Department of Justice. The FDA and the CDC, who have been in the news quite a bit lately, are under the Department of Health and Human Services. Oh yeah, speaking of the CDC, my beard is the style and length that it is because of CDC regulations on how to combat the coronavirus. You think I'm kidding? Seriously, here's a chart, look. Good old Center for Disease Control, right there. Now, each department is headed by a cabinet secretary, except for the Department of Justice that's headed by the Attorney General. These folks are known as higher level or upper level bureaucrats. The president usually selects a nominee to be a cabinet secretary based off of that person's politics. They want someone that's generally on the same page that they are. Usually the president will choose someone that had donated to their campaign or had endorsed them when they were running for president. Now, after the president picks a nominee, the Senate will hold a hearing where they can ask questions to the nominee. They'll ask questions to help them get a feel for how that person might govern as head of that particular department. After the hearing, the Senate then has a vote to either confirm or reject the nominee. If they're confirmed, congrats, they're now in charge of that department. But it's not just that one person that runs everything. They have to hire people underneath them to help delegate tasks. After all, you don't see the head of the FDA personally inspecting meats or the Attorney General himself actually making arrests. Instead, they hire lower-level bureaucrats who run a lot of the day-to-day tasks of the bureaucracy. These people are usually hired based on their merit, meaning they're hired based on how well they can do the job required of them. This might mean they're hired based off of their scores on a test they have to take or maybe previous job experience. Now, the reason lower-level bureaucrats are hired based on merit is due to the Pendleton Act, or sometimes called the Civil Service Reform Act, which tried to do away with something called patronage. Patronage is where someone is basically given a job because of their connections and who they know, which is the opposite of hiring someone based on their merit. Upper-level bureaucrats are typically hired through patronage because, again, they donated a lot of money to that president's campaign or they endorsed them when they were running for president. Now, the bureaucracy can sometimes be really controversial because the unelected leaders of a department can sometimes create rules and regulations. I mean, think about that. That's kind of scary, isn't it? Someone you nor anyone else elected can pretty much make laws. That kind of goes against the whole idea of separation of powers that James Madison wrote about in Federalist Number 51, too. After all, the executive is supposed to enforce laws and carry out the will of the legislature. The legislative branch, Congress, is supposed to make the laws, and the executive branch, the president and the cabinet, are supposed to enforce the laws. Now they can make laws and enforce them? That's a lot of centralization of power. So why can they do that? Well, sometimes Congress will delegate powers to the bureaucracies. Remember, members of Congress might have a general knowledge about various policy arenas, but they're not experts at everything. Most come from legal backgrounds and may not have any expertise on things like environmental policy or agricultural policy. Therefore, they sometimes will leave it up to the experts by allowing for something called bureaucratic discretion. And that's where they allow the experts in the bureaucracy to have some flexibility to create regulations and rules as they see fit. When the bureaucracy makes these types of rules, this is known as the rule-making function of the bureaucracy. So remember, members of Congress are generalists, whereas members of the bureaucracy are experts. Well, they're supposed to be. Maybe not always the upper level ones, because, patronage, but at least the lower level ones, right? Okay, well, maybe not always them either. And you might be wondering, but wait, what if a member of the bureaucracy makes a really bad rule or regulation that's outside the scope of their power? Well, there are some checks Congress and the president have on that. Well, first, the president can fire upper level bureaucrats, the cabinet secretaries, and President Trump has done that quite a bit. Secondly, remember Congress is the power of the purse according to the Constitution, which means they control the budget. If a bureaucratic agency does something they don't like, maybe they'll take money away from their budget so they can't effectively implement that bad rule. And remember, Congress can just pass a law undoing a rule that they don't like, or they can take that power away from the bureaucracy through law. But keep in mind, they've got to get that bill signed by the person that likely appointed that secretary, the president, who remember has to sign bills before they become law, unless Congress has enough support to override it by a 2/3 vote, which is extremely rare. Congress can also conduct an investigation into any wrongdoing by the executive and call members of the bureaucracy in to testify in front of them and answer questions about something. Oh yeah, there's one more member of the Iron Triangle that we forgot to talk about. Interest groups. Interest groups can affect the bureaucracy as well. They can run an advertising campaign mobilizing the public to contact their representatives to do any of the checks I just mentioned. PACs and interest groups can also donate to the campaign funds of senators who vote for or against nominated bureaucrats in the confirmation process according to the interest group's liking. Sometimes even bureaucrats that are very familiar with the regulation process can become lobbyists directly after they're done with their time in office. Special interest groups that have special policy expertise in certain policy areas can even give policy advice to members of Congress and the bureaucracy. And that's pretty much the briefest overview of the bureaucracy I can give you. So this week, complete 3 ed puzzles that review and go into much more depth on bureaucracies. The first one is called Bureaucracy Basics. The second one is called Types of Bureaucracies, and then the third ed puzzle is called Controlling Bureaucracies. These are crash course videos that will walk you through each of the sections of bureaucracy that you need to know. Keep in mind, the ed puzzles save automatically and grade automatically, so you don't need to let me know what your score is. Then, just like this past week, I have 2 practice FRQs for you to do as well. One is on Congress and the, you guessed it, bureaucracy, and the other is an argumentative FRQ on federalism and grants. Make sure you review your individual feedback from the last week's FRQs. It might be a good idea to review your chapter outline on bureaucracies as well. Everything, as always, is due by Friday night at 11:59 p.m. Also, keep an eye out in your email from updates from the College Board about the AP exam. They're also going to be sharing links to some live review sessions for AP Government from time to time. They also have some great resources to help you practice for the coronavirus exam on AP Classroom as well that you should check out. Don't forget, there's also plenty of review material on YouTube you can look at anytime as well. One last thing to mention, Google Classroom now has it to where I can set up an individual Google Hangout link for our particular class period. So I'm going to experiment with that a little bit and try to set it up. I believe it should enable us to be able to communicate one-on-one. So if you're confused on your FRQ, or you are just confused on the bureaucracy or anything reviewing for the exam, you may be able to email me and say, hey, can we talk on Google Hangouts, and we can share the link on there and we can talk one-on-one if you're really struggling with something in particular. So I'll experiment with that and I'll put a post in Classroom to let you guys know specifics once I get it figured out. Good luck this week, and as always, let me know if you need anything.